How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video. I just wanted to show you this little pouch that I made recently. It's called a Huswif, which is also known as a housewife. Let me tell you a little bit about it. So basically, it's a little pouch that contains sewing material. So it's a sewing kit that I made, and I've made it so to be incorporated into my outdoor equipment, so it's part of my outdoor gear, as well as my travel gear. So quite often I do need a threading needle. A couple of months back I went to a work event and my buttons fell off my coat and I didn't have a needle and a thread, so that's what got me thinking about doing this. These are like a vintage style sewing kit. These go back as far as the 1700s is where it's been documented. I'm sure it goes back further than that. They were all quite popular in the Victorian era. Everyone was carrying something like this, and they were made from different materials. Some of them had embroidery on it, some of them was made from scrap clothing. Some of them are rugged, some of them are, quite elegant to look at, and they were quite a common item to carry. Also, they were made by wives and girlfriends and mothers for soldiers in World War One, and they were given to the soldiers to take so they can repair their clothing and equipment. Because obviously running repairs was a common thing, so it wasn't just a woman's job to do the sewing. Men used to sew too, and they still do, and so they should. So a little sewing kit like this was valuable to the soldier. In World War II, I believe they made an issued version of this. It was like a green canvas. It had little buttons, and I think, or maybe a little ribbon that tied it up. Quite traditionally, they have ribbons and they go around and it's just tied up in a little bow. I put a button on mine. So I'm no expert on the sewing machine, okay, just to point that out. So I'm not the best at seaming things and what have not. However, I'm probably better at hand sewing than I am on the machine itself, hence with my leather work. I want to give you a little look around of how it was made. So it's made from a brown sort of wax cotton canvas. It has a wooden button that I put on there. I wanted the button on my one. Okay, and it's like an envelope, and this is not by all means period correct. It's not necessarily correct to size of the traditional ones. I wanted something very small, literally something I can screw up and just chuck into my pack, and that'd be that, and forget about it unless I need it. And it's very, very lightweight. Let's show you what it looks like inside. It just rolls out. I've put here a piece of material. Now, these are all different designs, so obviously I've gone for a pattern that I liked and just created my own pattern. Some of them have pin cushions, but I'm not doing embroidery or anything like that. Okay, so mine is just for repairing, that's it. In this piece of material here that has a deer stag on there, I felt that had that very bushcrafty feel to it, which I like. I put some pins in there. I've got some assorted needles, and I've got here a big sort of sail needle, good for leather and canvas, so repairing rucksacks and what have not. And behind that there's a different variety of assorted safety pins. I made these two little pockets. Okay, the top pocket has some threads that I've been winded onto, at the moment, card. I'll probably think about making a small wooden version of these little things. So this one here is a common black thread, and then you've got the white thread there, very strong thread that I use on a sewing machine, and this is like a nylon thread that's really thick, good for rucksacks and leather work, so you can melt that if I needed to as well. Inside there's a random button that should have been a bottom pocket. So, at the bottom pocket we've got this little, I suppose, bar type bracket for rucksacks as a spare. A pair of scissors that are broken. These are cheap scissors, so I'm going to put some new ones in here. It's just to illustrate what could go in here. There we go, fixed now. These are cheapy ones. I will put some better ones in there. It's got a needle threader. I've got a tape measure in case I need to measure something, and a bunch of buttons inside of there, and that's it. That's all I need. So everything just goes in nice and simple, and then we just roll it up and then chuck it into our packs, and that's it. So hopefully it's one of those kits that you don't have to use as often, but when you do need to run repairs, you can do so. And I know I could buy a sewing kit, but I wanted the project and I like the vintage feel this gives. So I'm going to show you how I made this. Like I say, I'm not a professional seamstress or tailor, but it's functional and that's all I wanted. So watch this video and enjoy, guys. So I'm using this tanned coloured wax cotton canvas I bought off eBay. I want my pouch to be about the size of a credit card with a button in the middle. So I create my own pattern and I use about 2 centimeters seam allowance all the way around, which is a bit overkill. However, I want to give myself plenty of space so I can create the seams. And I use this sort of little business card here to kind of help me with my measurements. I know that I want 2 pockets and a little bit of fabric to put the pins in, and I want it to button up rather than tying up. So I'm just creating my own pattern here on a piece of card. Once I've created that pattern, I then just cut this out, ensuring that I've got the size, and then once I'm happy with everything, then I'll go ahead and transfer this pattern over to the material that I'm using. Now that I have my pattern cut out, I then transfer this over to the wax cotton canvas that I've got. It's quite tricky marking this with a pen. I should really get myself the proper fabric pens. But I take my time to cut the pieces I need. Now this is going to be double layered, so I cut 2 larger pieces to be sewed together. They're identical. I also cut 2 pockets to be sewed in between the 2 layers, the 2 larger layers. So that's how the pockets will be fitted on. So you see I cut my stencil here to create the pockets and the size of the pockets. I give myself plenty of space for seam allowance on this. I also seam each end of the pocket, so the bottom and the top. So I start by doing that on the sewing machine. So here are the 2 pockets, they've been completed. I position them on my pouch on one of the panels that I've cut out and sort of decide exactly where I want them. And I start by stitching the bottom of the pockets onto this panel first. The next step is to decide how big I want my rectangular piece, the little flap where I put my pins and needles on, and I just sew this by using 2 straight lines to the size I want. I'll seam the end that I've put together where I folded it over later on when I put them onto my panel. Here I'm just cutting off any excess fabric that I don't need on this little rectangular piece, and I turn it inside out. So it's got like a little pocket, and then I'll seam it onto the panel where the opening is. So that's the majority of the pouch completed on the first panel. That's the main features of it. Now what I just need to do is put the other panel on top and then stitch it all the way round, leaving an opening at the top where I can turn it right side out. As I said before, guys, I'm still learning with the sewing machine, so trying to stay in a straight line can be quite challenging. So please don't shoot me for being an amateur at this. Now it's a case of turning it right side out and then finishing it off with a few extra little touches. So that's the main body complete. Now all I need to do is going to create my little triangular piece to go on the top here. So we'll be turning this inwards at the top and then putting that little triangular single piece just there. I'm just testing that out here to see how it looks so far. And then once I've done that triangular piece, it's a case of putting a button on and that should be complete. So I'm going to use this little scrap piece to create my little triangular top, and I just need to decide exactly where I want the triangle to start. So I'm just making some folds here, and I'm just kind of eyeballing this bit. There's no measurements taken. I'm just winging it, and then I just sew it into place and cut off any excess that's there. I also need to fold the end bits in, and I'm going to do that to the size of my pouch itself. Now that piece is made, I just sewed it at the top inside of it. So I'll just turn those top bits in, and that's it now done. So I'm just testing the fit here, and that's where I want my button to be, just there. So this is going to be a new experience for me. I've never made a buttonhole before, and I'm going to be using these settings here. Now, I think I butchered this, so I start off by making the ends, and then what I do is sew in some straight lines, so I can then cut a little slit for the buttonhole. But hey, you've got to start somewhere, and this is the first time I've made a buttonhole. I don't think I did too badly, if you ask me. I use a little razor blade just to open up the button now. So moment of truth here. So now I'm on to the final step by sewing on my little wooden button. I'm just making a few stitches here to mark out exactly where I want my button to be. I have to say it's been a fun little project. It's one of those good beginner projects. Obviously I've done a bit of sewing before, but sewing up a sewing kit on the sewing machine is a good way to start. It helps you sew those straight lines and practice a few little seams. So I'm going to put my little button on here and then fill it up with some content, and then that will be the project complete. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please give me a thumbs up, a like and subscribe. I do appreciate your support, guys, and if you enjoyed this little project, this is a good one to do. You don't have to actually have a sewing machine to complete it. A lot of people do make these little Huswifs or Housewives by hand. I'm a little bit impatient, so I've used a sewing machine in this video. I am just filling up my little housewife now with all the items I need, all the ones I showed you at the beginning. So I'll start by putting my needles in my little needle holder and my pins. And then I'll fill up my pockets with some accessories, things like thread, buttons and tape measure, etc. So I'm just going to pop them into the pocket, just there. I have to say this is going to be a handy little thing to carry around. It's an ideal little sewing kit. I've got a few different sewing kits I used to carry, but this one has probably been by far the better one that I like, and this will be ideal for the outdoors. And even if I'm traveling, this will be enough, everything I'll need in my rucksack. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon. I hope you like my little housewife.